Dr. Marcus Chen had never wanted to be anything other than a healer. Even as plasma bolts scorched the air around him, even as the screams of wounded soldiers echoed across the battlefield of Kepler 442b, his hands remained steady as he worked to save lives. The red cross on his helmet was faded and scarred, but it still marked him as what he had always been, a medic, nothing more, nothing less. The war between humanity and the Zephyrian Collective had been raging for 3 years now. What started as a territorial dispute over mining rights had escalated into a full-scale conflict spanning 12 star systems. The Zephyrians, with their chitinous exoskeletons and 4 arms, had superior numbers and technology. Humanity was losing, and everyone knew it. Marcus crouched behind a collapsed concrete barrier, his medical kit spread before him as he worked on Corporal Davies. The young soldier had taken a plasma blast to the chest, and the synthetic flesh around the wound was already beginning to necrose. Without immediate treatment, Davies would be dead within the hour. "Doc, we need to move," Sergeant Williams shouted over the din of battle. "The bugs are pushing through Sector 7. Marcus didn't look up from his patient. His scanner showed massive internal bleeding, and the portable surgery unit was already deployed. "2 more minutes, Sergeant. I can save him." A Zephyrian battle cry echoed across the battlefield, a sound like breaking glass mixed with a death rattle. Marcus had heard it countless times before. In his first few months on the front lines, that sound had made his hands shake. Now it was just background noise. The irony wasn't lost on him that he had become one of the most requested medics in the entire human fleet, not because he was particularly skilled, though 3 years of battlefield medicine had certainly honed his abilities, but because he had a reputation for never leaving anyone behind. In a war where human lives were increasingly expendable, Marcus had made it his mission to prove that every single one mattered. His fingers moved with practiced precision as he sealed the wound and injected Davies with a cocktail of antibiotics and synthetic blood. The soldier's vitals stabilized and his eyes fluttered open. "Easy there, Corporal," Marcus said softly. "You're going to be fine. Just need to get you back to the medical bay." Davies tried to speak, but Marcus placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Save your strength. Williams, help me get him to the transport." As they carried the wounded soldier across the battlefield, Marcus couldn't help but notice the way the other troops looked at him. There was respect there, certainly, but also something else. Hope, maybe. In a war where victory seemed impossible, the fact that Dr. Marcus Chen could bring people back from the brink of death had become something of a legend. What Marcus didn't know was that his reputation had spread far beyond human lines. 3 sectors away, Zephyrian Battle Commander HFY was reviewing the day's intelligence reports. The human resistance in this sector had been unexpectedly fierce, and casualties among his warriors were mounting. But one piece of information caught his attention: multiple references to a human medic who seemed to appear wherever the fighting was heaviest. "Show me the surveillance footage from Grid 77 Alpha." HFY clicked to his intelligence officer. The holographic display shimmered to life, showing grainy footage of the human positions. There, moving between wounded soldiers with impossible calm, was a figure in medical whites. Even as plasma fire rained down around him, the human never faltered, never hesitated. "How many of our warriors has this medic treated?" HFY asked. "None, Battle Commander. Human medical personnel are instructed not to treat enemy wounded." "No." HFY's mandibles clicked in annoyance. "How many of our warriors has he returned to combat fitness?" The intelligence officer consulted his datapad. "In the past month, this medic has treated approximately 300 human soldiers. Our estimates suggest that without his intervention, at least 200 of those would have died. He has single-handedly returned the equivalent of 2 full companies to active duty." HFY studied the footage more carefully. The human moved with a peculiar grace, completely focused on his task. There was something almost ritualistic about the way he worked, as if each life he saved was a sacred act. "What do we know about him personally?" "Very little, Battle Commander. Human communications refer to him simply as Doc or Dr. Chen. No military rank, no combat training visible in his movements. By all accounts, he is exactly what he appears to be, a medic. And yet," HFY mused, "he is responsible for more continued human resistance than any of their generals." Back on the human side of the lines, Marcus was finishing up in the field hospital. The day had been brutal, with over 50 wounded brought in. His back ached, His hands were stained with blood, both human and synthetic, and he hadn't eaten in 12 hours. But everyone who had made it to his table was going to live. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Park found him sitting outside the medical tent, finally allowing himself a moment of rest. "Hell of a day, Doc." Marcus looked up at her with tired eyes. "Could have been worse. We didn't lose anybody today. You know the brass has been talking about promoting you, right? Maybe get you off the front lines, set you up with a nice safe position at Fleet Medical." The suggestion hit Marcus like a physical blow. "With respect, Colonel, no. My place is here with the troops. Marcus, you're probably the best field medic in the entire fleet. Your skills could train dozens of other medics, save thousands of lives indirectly." "Maybe," Marcus admitted. "But there are soldiers out there right now who need help. Tomorrow there will be more. I can't train anyone if I'm not here to learn from what we're facing." Colonel Park nodded slowly. She had expected that answer. "Just know that the offer stands. You've earned the right to a safer posting." As she walked away, Marcus leaned back against the prefab wall and looked up at the alien stars. Somewhere out there, Zephyrian families were mourning their dead just as human families were mourning theirs. The thought should have troubled him more than it did, but after 3 years of war, he had learned to focus on what he could control. The life in front of him, the next patient, the next chance to prove that in a universe full of violence, healing still mattered. What he couldn't know was that in the Zephyrian command center, his image was being distributed to every unit commander with a simple message: priority target. This human medic is to be eliminated at all costs. The first assassination attempt came 3 days later, during a routine medical evacuation. Marcus was loading wounded soldiers into a transport when Zephyrian snipers opened fire from the surrounding ridgeline. The shots weren't random covering fire, they were precise, targeted specifically at him. Private Johnson threw himself in front of Marcus just as a plasma bolt seared through the air where the medic's head had been. The young soldier took the hit in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground. "Sniper!" someone shouted, but Marcus was already moving. He dragged Johnson behind the transport and began working on the wound even as more shots rang out. The private was conscious but in shock, his eyes wide with pain and confusion. "Why?" Johnson gasped. "Why are they shooting at you, Doc?" "You're a medic." Marcus didn't have an answer. In 3 years of war, he had never been deliberately targeted. The unwritten rules of combat had always protected medical personnel on both sides. Something had changed. Sergeant Williams crawled over to them, his rifle in hand. "Doc, we need to get you out of here. This isn't random fire, they're hunting you specifically." "I'm not leaving until everyone's loaded," Marcus replied, applying pressure to Johnson's wound. The bleeding was under control, but the private needed proper surgery. "Then we make them stop," Williams growled. He keyed his comm unit. "All units, this is Sergeant Williams. We have enemy snipers targeting medical personnel. I need covering fire on the North Ridge. Coordinates 379er. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Every human soldier in the area opened fire on the sniper positions, their rage at this violation of combat ethics driving them to unusual ferocity. Within minutes, the Zephyrian fire ceased, but Marcus knew this was just the beginning. As they flew back to base, he stared out the transport window at the alien landscape and wondered what he had done to earn such focused hatred. He was just a medic. He had never carried a weapon, never fired a shot in anger. His only crime was refusing to let people die. At Zephyrian High Command, the failure of the assassination attempt was met with cold analysis rather than anger. Battle Commander Thexai studied the after-action reports with growing interest. The human soldiers' response was unusually coordinated. His aide reported, when their medic was threatened, they abandoned their defensive positions to provide covering fire. They prioritized his safety over tactical advantage. "Fascinating," Thexai clicked. "Show me the casualty reports from sectors where this medic operates versus sectors where he does not." The holographic display lit up with statistical analysis. The difference was stark. Human resistance was consistently stronger in areas where Dr. Marcus Chen was present. Not because he was a tactical genius or a warrior, but because his mere presence seemed to inspire the human soldiers to fight harder, take greater risks, and never give up. He is their totem, Thexai realized, their symbol of hope. Every life he saves proves to them that their cause is not hopeless. Shall we increase efforts to eliminate him, Battle Commander? Thexai was quiet for a long moment, his 4 arms moving in a gesture of deep thought. No. Direct assassination attempts will only martyr him and strengthen their resolve. We need a different approach. The next phase of the Zephyrian strategy became apparent during the Battle of Centauri Station. Marcus was working in a forward aid station when the attack began, but this time something was different. The Zephyrian forces weren't trying to overrun human positions. They were systematically targeting wounded soldiers. "Doc, they're executing our wounded." Corporal Martinez burst into the aid station, his face pale with shock. "They're not taking prisoners anymore. They're just killing anyone who can't fight back." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. Through the transparent aluminum windows of the aid station, he could see Zephyrian warriors moving through the battlefield, their weapons trained on fallen human soldiers. This was a deliberate strategy, designed to force him into an impossible choice. "Get everyone who can walk to the secondary positions," Marcus ordered. "Leave the critical cases with me. Doc, you can't stay here with just the worst wounded. When the bugs break through, then I'll be here to treat whoever needs treatment," Marcus cut him off. "That's my job." As the fighting drew closer, Marcus found himself alone with 12 critically wounded soldiers who couldn't be moved without risking their lives. Outside, he could hear the distinctive sound of Zephyrian weapons getting closer. His hands never stopped moving as he worked to stabilize his patients, but his mind was racing. The aid station door burst open, and 3 Zephyrian warriors stepped inside. Their chitinous armor was scarred from battle, and their compound eyes fixed on Marcus with unmistakable recognition. They had come specifically for him. Marcus stood slowly, placing himself between the aliens and his patients. He was unarmed, as always, with nothing but his medical kit and his oath to do no harm. "I am a medic," he said clearly, though he doubted they understood his words. "These are wounded, non-combatants." The lead Zephyrian raised its weapon, but then paused. Its mandibles clicked in what Marcus had learned was their equivalent of speech, though he couldn't understand the words. The 3 aliens seemed to be having some kind of discussion. Finally, the leader lowered its weapon slightly. It gestured to the wounded humans, then back to Marcus, clicking rapidly. The meaning was clear enough. "Treat our wounded too, or we kill everyone." Marcus looked around the aid station. In one corner, he noticed for the first time, lay 2 Zephyrian warriors who had been brought in during the confusion of battle. They were badly wounded but alive. Without hesitation, Marcus walked over to the first alien casualty. The warrior who had been threatening him clicked in alarm, but Marcus ignored the weapon trained on him and began examining the wounded Zephyrian's injuries. The alien had taken human plasma fire to the thorax. The wound was severe but treatable. Marcus applied the same careful attention he gave to human patients, using his knowledge of Zephyrian anatomy gained from 3 years of treating their battle damage. As he worked, he was acutely aware of the 3 armed Zephyrians watching his every move. One wrong gesture, one sign that he was causing harm instead of healing, and they would kill him and every wounded human in the room. But Marcus had never been more certain of his purpose. As he sealed the alien warrior's wounds and monitored its vital signs, he realized that this was what he had always been meant to do. Not to serve humanity's war machine, but to serve life itself, regardless of what form it took. The wounded Zephyrian's eyes opened, focusing on Marcus with an expression he couldn't read. The alien tried to speak, but Marcus placed a gentle hand on its thorax in the same calming gesture he used with human patients. "Easy," he said softly. "You're going to be fine." When he finished treating both wounded aliens, the armed Zephyrians stood in what appeared to be stunned silence. Finally, their leader made a complex gesture with all 4 arms and spoke a single word that Marcus somehow understood, despite the language barrier. "Healer." Then they left, taking their wounded comrades with them and leaving Marcus and his human patients unharmed. As the sounds of battle faded, Marcus sat down heavily and tried to process what had just happened. He had crossed a line that no human medic had crossed before. He had treated the enemy, saved alien lives, and somehow earned their respect in the process. But he also knew that when word of this reached human command, he would have a lot of explaining to do. The court-martial proceedings began exactly 72 hours after the incident at Centauri Station. Marcus sat in the sterile white room aboard the fleet command ship, facing a panel of 3 senior officers whose expressions ranged from disappointment to barely contained fury. Admiral Harrison, a weathered veteran with steel-gray hair, held up the official report. Dr. Marcus Chen, you stand accused of providing aid and comfort to the enemy, violation of the Military Medical Ethics Code, and conduct prejudicial to good order and military discipline. How do you plead? Not guilty, sir, Marcus replied quietly. I provided medical aid to wounded beings who were no longer combatants. That's what medics do. Colonel Reeves, the prosecuting officer, stood up sharply. What medics do, doctor, is treat human soldiers. Our soldiers, not the alien monsters who are trying to wipe us from the galaxy. They're not monsters, Colonel. They're sentient beings with families, hopes, fears. When they're wounded and helpless, they're patients. Nothing more, nothing less. The third panel member, General Morrison, leaned forward. Dr. Chen, are you aware that those aliens you saved have likely returned to combat and may well kill human soldiers? Marcus met his gaze steadily. And the human soldiers I've saved have likely killed Zephyrian warriors. Should I stop treating humans because they might kill aliens? Where does that logic end, General? That's entirely different, and you know it, Admiral Harrison snapped. We're fighting for humanity's survival. No, sir. We're fighting over mining rights that escalated into a war neither side knows how to end. I've read the original dispute files. This isn't about survival. It's about pride and resources. The silence that followed was deafening. Colonel Reeves looked like he wanted to arrest Marcus for sedition on the spot. Admiral Harrison finally spoke. Doctor, even if we accept your interpretation of this conflict, you violated direct orders. Human medical personnel are forbidden from treating enemy combatants. I was never given those orders, sir. My oath as a physician requires me to treat any patient who needs help, regardless of their species or allegiance. That oath predates my military service and supersedes it. Your military service is what's keeping you from a firing squad right now, General Morrison warned. 3 years of exemplary service and your reputation among the troops is the only thing standing between you and a court-martial conviction. Marcus remained silent. He had expected this reaction, had known that treating the Zephyrian wounded would have consequences. But he had also known that he couldn't do anything else and still look at himself in the mirror. The deliberations took 6 hours. During that time, Marcus was confined to quarters, though he noticed that his guard detail seemed more protective than punitive. Word of the trial had spread throughout the ship, and the reaction from the enlisted personnel was overwhelmingly supportive. Sergeant Williams had submitted a statement defending Marcus's actions. So had every soldier in his unit, along with dozens of others whose lives he had saved. The petition requesting clemency had over 3,000 signatures from across the fleet. When Marcus was called back to face the panel, Admiral Harrison looked older and more tired than before. Dr. Chen, this panel finds you guilty of violating military protocol and treating enemy combatants without authorization. However, given your exemplary service record and the unique circumstances of the incident, we are imposing a suspended sentence. You will receive an official reprimand but will continue in your current duties. Marcus nodded. It was about as good an outcome as he could have hoped for. However, Admiral Harrison continued, you are hereby ordered not to treat enemy personnel under any circumstances. Is that understood? I understand the order, sir. That's not the same as agreeing to follow it, is it, Doctor? Marcus looked at the 3 officers for a long moment. I will follow all lawful orders, sir. But if wounded beings are placed in front of me, I will treat them. That's who I am. The panel exchanged glances. Finally, Admiral Harrison dismissed him with a wave. Get out of here, Doctor. And try not to start any more diplomatic incidents. Word of the trial and its outcome spread quickly through both human and Zephyrian forces. Among the humans, Marcus's willingness to face court-martial rather than abandon his principles only enhanced his already legendary status. But the real surprise came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the trial, a Zephyrian dropship approached the human lines under a flag of truce. It was unprecedented. Neither side had attempted formal communication since the war began. The ship landed in the neutral zone between the opposing forces, and a single Zephyrian warrior emerged. It was carrying something that looked like a medical kit. The warrior stood in the open ground between the armies and waited. After an hour of tense negotiations through interpreters, a small delegation was allowed to approach. Marcus, despite orders to stay back, was part of that delegation. The Zephyrian warrior was massive, even by their standards, with elaborate markings carved into its chitinous armor. Through the interpreter, it identified itself as warrior physician Kethmore, equivalent to a human military doctor. The healer who stands between, it said, looking directly at Marcus. You saved my nest brother at Centauri Station. I come to honor the debt. Marcus blinked in surprise. There's no debt. I did what any medic would do. Kethmore's mandibles clicked in what the interpreter identified as amusement. No human medic has treated our wounded in 3 cycles of war. You are unique. The alien doctor opened its medical kit and withdrew what appeared to be a sophisticated surgical instrument. This is a gift from the Zephyrian Medical Council. It can heal wounds that your human technology cannot. Use it to save lives. Colonel Park, who was leading the human delegation, stepped forward. We can't accept gifts from enemy forces. The gift is not for your military, Kethmore replied. It is for the healer who stands between. In our culture, one who saves life without regard for tribe or territory is sacred. The instrument is offered in recognition of this status. Marcus looked at the device, then at the alien doctor. If I accept this, what does it mean? It means that the medical council recognizes your neutrality. Human or Zephyrian, all wounded brought to you will be treated fairly. In return, you will not be targeted by our forces, and your aid stations will be considered neutral ground. The implications were staggering. Marcus would essentially become a one-person neutral zone in the middle of an active war. It was unprecedented, possibly illegal under human military law, and completely insane. I accept, Marcus said without hesitation. Colonel Park grabbed his arm. Marcus, you can't possibly— Yes, I can, he replied, taking the alien medical device. It was warm to the touch and seemed to hum with barely contained energy. If this saves lives, if it gives us even a small chance at stopping the killing, then I have to try. Kethmore made a complex gesture with all 4 arms. Then you are truly the healer who stands between. May your path bring peace to both our peoples. As the Zephyrian doctor returned to its ship, Marcus stared at the alien medical device in his hands. He had just become something entirely new in the history of human warfare. A neutral medic in the middle of an active battlefield, recognized by both sides as off-limits to violence. He had also, he realized, just painted the biggest target on his back in military history. Not everyone on either side would accept this new arrangement, and there would be those who saw his neutrality as the ultimate betrayal. The alien medical device proved to be unlike anything human science had encountered. Marcus spent hours studying its smooth, organic curves and the way it seemed to respond to his touch. When he finally used it for the first time on a human soldier with severe neural damage, the results were miraculous. Injuries that should have left Private Rodriguez paralyzed were healed completely within minutes. But the real test came 2 weeks later, when a Zephyrian patrol brought their wounded to Marcus's aid station. The warriors approached slowly, their weapons lowered but ready. They carried one of their own who had stepped on a human mine. The blast had torn through the alien's lower extremities, and green ichor was leaking steadily from multiple wounds. Marcus had set up his new aid station in a bombed-out research facility exactly halfway between the front lines. It was neutral ground by agreement, marked with both human red crosses and Zephyrian healing symbols. But this was the first time either side had actually tested that neutrality. The lead warrior, smaller than most but with intricate markings that suggested high rank, approached cautiously. Through hand gestures and broken human phrases, it conveyed its injured comrade's condition. Marcus moved forward without hesitation, his medical kit in hand. The wounded Zephyrian was unconscious and losing circulation rapidly. Using a combination of human medical techniques and the alien device, Marcus worked to stop the bleeding and repair the damaged tissue. As he worked, more figures emerged from the surrounding ruins. Human soldiers had been watching from concealed positions, ready to provide support if the Zephyrians violated the neutral ground agreement. The 2 groups now faced each other across the makeshift medical facility, weapons at the ready, while Marcus operated on the alien warrior. Doc, Sergeant Williams called softly from the human side. You've got company coming from the north, too. More Zephyrian warriors were approaching, likely drawn by reports that their comrade was receiving treatment. Within minutes, Marcus found himself working in the middle of what looked like a standoff between 40 heavily armed soldiers from both species. The tension was thick enough to cut. One wrong move, one misunderstood gesture, and the neutral ground would become a massacre. But Marcus continued his work, his hands steady as he used the alien device to regenerate damaged neural pathways in the wounded warrior's spine. "Healer," the lead Zephyrian spoke in carefully pronounced human words. "How does my nest sibling fare?" Marcus looked up from his work. "He'll live. Full recovery, though he'll need several days of rest." The relief in the alien's posture was unmistakable. The council spoke truth. "You truly stand between." From the human side, a voice called out, "Doc, we've got incoming wounded too. Transport's 2 minutes out." A human medical evacuation shuttle was approaching, carrying casualties from a skirmish in Sector 12. Marcus realized he was about to face an unprecedented situation, treating soldiers from both sides simultaneously, while their comrades watched each other through weapon sights. The shuttle landed, and medics began unloading wounded humans. Marcus quickly established a triage system, directing the most critical cases to the center of the facility, where he could work on them directly, while less serious injuries were handled by his human medical team at the periphery. What happened next would be talked about for years afterward. As Marcus moved between human and Zephyrian patients, something remarkable occurred. The soldiers on both sides began to lower their weapons, their attention focused on the medical drama unfolding before them. A young human private with a chest wound lay on a table next to a Zephyrian warrior with a damaged arm. Both were conscious, both staring at each other with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The private was maybe 19 years old, barely more than a boy. The Zephyrian's marking suggested it was equally young by their standards. Marcus found himself translating between them as he worked. "He wants to know if you have a family," he told the private while adjusting the alien device to work on human physiology. "Yeah," the boy whispered. "Little sister back on Earth, tell him she's studying to be a teacher." Marcus conveyed this to the Zephyrian, whose compound eyes widened. It replied with a series of clicks and gestures. "He says his sibling is also an educator," Marcus translated, "teaching young ones about the star patterns for navigation." As the hours passed, more wounded arrived from both sides. Marcus's aid station became a strange bubble of cooperation in the middle of a war zone. Human and Zephyrian medics worked together, sharing supplies and techniques. Soldiers who had been trying to kill each other that morning found themselves lying side by side, discovering they had more in common than they had ever imagined. The breakthrough moment came when a Zephyrian warrior named Thekeval demonstrated a battlefield technique for treating plasma burns that was far superior to human methods. He taught it to Marcus's human medics, who immediately began using it on their own wounded. In return, Dr. Sarah Kim showed the Zephyrian medics how to use human synthetic blood substitutes, which proved compatible with Zephyrian physiology and could extend the treatment window for critical injuries. Marcus watched this exchange with growing amazement. 3 years of war, thousands of deaths, and it was taking medical necessity to show both sides that they could work together. But he also noticed the radio chatter increasing. Word of what was happening at the neutral aid station was spreading up the command chains on both sides. Not everyone would be pleased with this development. His concerns proved justified when Colonel Reeves arrived with a full company of human soldiers. The colonel's face was flushed with anger as he surveyed the scene. "What in the hell is going on here, Chen?" he demanded. "This looks like a goddamn alien love fest, not a medical facility." Marcus stood up from where he had been treating a Zephyrian with internal injuries. "I'm providing medical care to wounded personnel from both sides, as agreed under the neutral ground protocols." "The neutral ground protocols were never officially approved by Fleet Command," Reeves snapped. "And I'm pretty sure they didn't include joint training exercises with the enemy." The Zephyrian warriors had noticed the new arrivals and were moving to defensive positions. The fragile cooperation that had been building throughout the day suddenly felt very fragile indeed. "Colonel," Marcus said carefully, "what you're seeing here is medical personnel sharing techniques that save lives. Human lives, Zephyrian lives, it doesn't matter. We're learning from each other." "It matters to me," Reeves replied. "You're teaching them how to keep their soldiers alive so they can kill more of ours. And they're teaching us how to keep our soldiers alive so they can go home to their families," Marcus countered. "Sir, we've treated 37 wounded today. 19 humans, 18 Zephyrians. Every single one of them is going to live because of what we've accomplished here." Reeves looked around the aid station, taking in the mixed groups of medical personnel and the wounded from both species receiving care side by side. Marcus could see the internal struggle on his face. "This is bigger than you, Chen," the colonel finally said. "This is going to go all the way up to Fleet Command, maybe even to Earth government. What you're doing here, it's going to change things." "I hope so, sir," Marcus replied quietly, "because what we're doing now isn't working for anyone." As if to emphasize his point, another shuttle arrived with more wounded. This time, it was a mixed transport carrying casualties from both sides who had been caught in the same artillery barrage. Human and Zephyrian soldiers who had been fighting each other were now depending on each other for survival. Colonel Reeves watched as Marcus and his mixed medical team worked to save them all. And Marcus could see the moment when the colonel's perspective began to shift. This wasn't about politics or military strategy. This was about the simple recognition that suffering was universal and that healing transcended the artificial boundaries of war. The news reached both high commands within hours. On the human side, Admiral Harrison found himself in an emergency session with the War Council, while Battle Commander HFY faced similar scrutiny from the Zephyrian Strategic Assembly. Both military leaders were being asked the same impossible question: how do you fight a war when your soldiers are learning to see the enemy as people? Admiral Harrison stared at the surveillance footage of Marcus's aid station, with a mixture of admiration and despair. "Gentlemen, we have a problem. Our troops are starting to question why they're fighting." General Morrison leaned back in his chair. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Admiral. Have you looked at the casualty reports lately? We're losing this war. Our best projections show total defeat within 18 months. Are you suggesting we surrender, General?" "I'm suggesting we consider alternatives to mutual annihilation," Morrison replied. "Dr. Chen has shown us that cooperation between our species is possible. Maybe it's time to explore that option." Defense Secretary Williams, attending via hologram from Earth, shook his head firmly. "Absolutely not. The Zephyrians started this war with their unreasonable territorial demands. We cannot be seen as weak by negotiating from a position of military disadvantage." Meanwhile, in the Zephyrian Command Center, Battle Commander HFY was having a remarkably similar conversation. The Strategic Assembly was divided between those who saw Marcus's actions as a threat to military morale and those who recognized an opportunity for peace. "The human healer has created something unprecedented," Sub-Commander Veltara observed. "Our warriors speak of him with respect, even reverence. They call him the Bridgewalker, one who moves between worlds." "Respect for an enemy medic does not translate to military advantage," growled war leader Zekmar. "It translates to weakness. Our warriors should fear human medical personnel, not honor them." HFY studied the intelligence reports carefully. "Actually, war leader, the data suggests otherwise. Sectors where our forces have encountered this medic show decreased desertion rates and improved morale. Our warriors fight harder when they know that capture or injury does not mean death." The implications were staggering. Marcus had inadvertently discovered something that military strategists had missed. Soldiers fought more effectively when they believed their lives had value beyond their utility as weapons. Back at the aid station, Marcus was unaware of the political storm brewing around him. He was focused on a more immediate crisis: the arrival of extremist forces from both sides who rejected the neutral ground agreements. The first sign of trouble came when Sergeant Williams noticed unmarked vehicles approaching from multiple directions. "Doc, we've got unidentified contacts. No transponder signals, no unit markings." Marcus looked up from where he was treating a Zephyrian warrior with severe burns. The alien device in his hands had become as familiar as any human medical tool, and he had learned to use it with remarkable precision. "How many?" he asked, not pausing in his work. "At least 3 squads, maybe more." "They're not answering hails." The vehicle stopped just outside the perimeter of the neutral zone, and armed figures began deploying. Marcus could see both human and Zephyrian extremists, groups that had apparently decided his aid station represented an unacceptable compromise with the enemy. "All medical personnel," Marcus called out. "Continue your work. Do not engage with any hostile forces unless directly threatened." The wounded soldiers from both species watched nervously as the extremists took positions around the aid station. Some of the human patients tried to sit up, reaching for weapons that weren't there. "Easy," Marcus said to a young corporal with a leg wound. "You're in a medical facility. No one fights here." "But Doc, those guys don't look like they care about medical neutrality." Marcus had to admit the corporal was right. The extremists were clearly preparing for an assault. and the mixed human-Zephyrian medical staff found themselves trapped in the middle. That's when something remarkable happened. The regular military forces from both sides, who had been maintaining the perimeter of the neutral zone, began moving to intercept the extremists. Colonel Reeves, who had remained at the aid station to observe the situation, got on his radio. "All units, this is Colonel Reeves. The neutral medical facility is under threat from unidentified hostiles. You are authorized to use whatever force necessary to protect medical personnel and patients." On the Zephyrian side, a similar order was being given. For the first time in 3 years of war, human and Zephyrian forces were preparing to fight together against a common enemy. The battle was brief, but intense. The extremists, expecting to face only medical personnel and wounded soldiers, found themselves confronting a coordinated defense by professional military units from both species. The regular forces had spent weeks watching each other across the neutral zone, and had developed an understanding of each other's tactics and capabilities. Within 30 minutes, the attack was repelled. Several extremists from both sides were wounded in the fighting and were brought to Marcus's aid station for treatment. He worked on them with the same care he showed all patients, even as they cursed him for his betrayal of their respective species. The aftermath of the attack created an unprecedented situation. Human and Zephyrian officers found themselves conducting a joint after-action review, sharing intelligence about extremist groups and coordinating security for the neutral zone. Captain Martinez, the senior human officer present, extended one of his hands to Sub-Commander Kylaneth in what he hoped was a gesture of respect. The Zephyrian officer looked at the offered hand for a moment, then grasped it with 2 of his 4 appendages. "Your forces fought with honor," Martinez said through the translator. "As did yours," Kylaneth replied. "Perhaps there is more similarity between our peoples than either side has admitted." Marcus watched this exchange with growing hope. The neutral aid station had become something more than a medical facility. It was becoming a bridge between 2 species that had forgotten how to communicate with anything other than weapons. But he also knew that the real test was still coming. The politicians and generals on both sides would soon be forced to decide whether to embrace this unexpected opportunity for peace or to shut it down in the name of military necessity. That evening, as Marcus performed surgery on a Zephyrian warrior who had been injured defending the aid station, he received word that delegations from both high commands were en route. Admiral Harrison and Battle Commander HFY were coming to see for themselves what was happening in the neutral zone. "Doc," Sergeant Williams said quietly, "whatever happens when the brass gets here, you should know that every soldier in this sector supports what you're doing, human and Zephyrian both." Marcus nodded, his attention focused on the delicate neural surgery he was performing with the alien device. The Zephyrian warrior's life hung in the balance, just as the fragile piece he had helped create balanced on the edge of a knife. "All we can do is keep saving lives," Marcus replied, "and hope that eventually someone realizes that's more important than winning a war." Outside the aid station, the first ships of the joint diplomatic mission were appearing on the horizon. The next few hours would determine whether Marcus's vision of neutral ground would become the foundation for peace, or be remembered as a brief, impossible dream in the middle of an endless war. The wounded Zephyrian's vitals stabilized, and Marcus allowed himself a small smile. At least this life was saved. In a universe where so much seemed determined by politics and military strategy, that had to count for something. The joint diplomatic mission arrived at dawn, bringing with it the highest-ranking officials from both militaries. Admiral Harrison's flagship descended alongside Battle Commander HFY's command vessel, the 2 ships maintaining a careful distance that spoke volumes about the delicate nature of this unprecedented meeting. Marcus had been awake for 36 hours straight, working through the night to stabilize patients who had been injured in the extremist attack. His hands were steady as ever, but exhaustion weighed on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He looked up as the landing craft approached, knowing that everything he had built here was about to be tested. Admiral Harrison emerged from his transport with a full honor guard, his expression carefully neutral. Battle Commander HFY descended from his vessel surrounded by elite warriors, their armor gleaming in the morning sun. The 2 leaders approached the aid station from opposite directions, meeting at the entrance to the neutral zone. For a moment, the 2 most powerful military leaders in this sector of space stood face to face. separated by 3 years of warfare and the deaths of thousands of their subordinates. Then Admiral Harrison did something that would be remembered in history books. He saluted. Battle Commander HFY paused, his compound eyes studying the human gesture. Then, in a movement that required careful coordination of all 4 arms, he returned what could only be interpreted as a salute in the Zephyrian military tradition. Marcus watched this exchange from inside the aid station, where he was checking on his patients. Many of the wounded soldiers from both species had insisted on staying to witness this historic meeting, despite medical recommendations for evacuation. "Doc," whispered Private Chen, a young soldier recovering from severe burns, "is this really happening? Are they actually talking to each other?" "It's happening," Marcus replied, adjusting the human Zephyrian hybrid monitoring equipment that had been developed through the cooperation of both medical teams. "Whether anything comes of it is up to them." Admiral Harrison and Battle Commander HFY entered the aid station together, their respective entourages maintaining careful spacing. Marcus stood up as they approached, suddenly very aware that he was still wearing his blood-stained medical whites and probably looked like he had been through a war zone. Which, of course he had. "Dr. Chen," Admiral Harrison said formally, "I'm here to evaluate the unusual situation you've created. Battle Commander HFY has come to observe the Bridgewalker's domain," the alien leader added through his translator device. "Your reputation has spread far beyond this battlefield." Marcus gestured around the aid station, where human and Zephyrian medical personnel continued their work side by side. "With respect, sirs, I haven't created anything. I've just been doing my job, treating wounded beings who need help. Your job," Admiral Harrison said pointedly, "is to treat human military personnel." "My job," Marcus replied quietly but firmly, "is to preserve life. The Hippocratic Oath doesn't specify species." Battle Commander HFY studied a group of patients receiving treatment. A human soldier with a prosthetic arm was helping a Zephyrian warrior practice using a mobility device developed by the combined medical teams. The sight was so incongruous with everything the war had represented that the alien commander's mandibles clicked in what his translator identified as amazement. "Show us," HFY said simply. "Show us what you have accomplished here." For the next 2 hours, Marcus conducted a tour that would change the course of the war. He showed the 2 leaders how medical techniques from both civilizations had been combined to create treatment protocols that were superior to anything either side had developed independently. He demonstrated the alien medical device that had been gifted to him, and how human knowledge of physiology had allowed him to adapt it for treating both species. Most importantly, he introduced them to patients who had been treated together, human and Zephyrian soldiers who had discovered they shared similar fears, hopes, and dreams, warriors who had learned each other's names and asked about each other's families. "This is Corporal Rodriguez," Marcus said, stopping beside a human soldier who was playing what appeared to be a card game with a Zephyrian warrior. He was critically injured by a plasma mine 3 weeks ago. "I used Zephyrian medical technology to save his legs." Rodriguez looked up at the 2 commanders. "Sir, before I came here, I thought the bugs were just monsters, you know? But HFY here," he gestured to his alien companion. "He's been teaching me their strategy game. Turns out it's a lot like chess, but more complex. He's got 3 kids back home just like me." The Zephyrian warrior, HFY, made a gesture that the translator interpreted as respectful greeting. "The human speaks truth. Before injury, I believed your species was without honor or intelligence. This has proven incorrect. Corporal Rodriguez shows tactical thinking that would impress our War College instructors." Admiral Harrison and Battle Commander HFY exchanged glances. This was not what either had expected to find. The real revelation came when they observed a joint medical procedure. A transport had arrived with casualties from a mining accident in the disputed territory. Both human and Zephyrian workers had been trapped in a collapsed tunnel. The rescue had been a cooperative effort, and now the medical treatment was as well. Dr. Sarah Kim was leading a surgical team that included both human and Zephyrian medics. The patient was a human geologist, with massive internal injuries that required techniques from both medical traditions to address. The Zephyrian approach to internal organ repair is far more sophisticated than ours, Dr. Kim explained as she worked. Their understanding of biomolecular regeneration is decades ahead of human science. But our surgical precision and anesthetic protocols are superior. Together, we can perform procedures that neither species could accomplish alone. Battle Commander. Thexai watched as one of his medical officers carefully guided human instruments with precision that impressed even the human surgeons. Warrior Physician Nextall, he said, explain your assessment of this cooperation. The Zephyrian medic paused in his work. Battle Commander. Human medical knowledge complements our own in ways that seem almost designed by the universe. Their understanding of neural pathways allows us to perform reconstructive procedures we thought impossible. In return, our regenerative techniques can heal damage they considered permanent. And what is your opinion of working with human medical personnel? They are surprisingly competent, Battle Commander. Their dedication to preserving life matches our own. In many ways, they think as we do. Admiral Harrison was having his own revelations. Dr. Kim, what's your professional assessment of the Zephyrian medical techniques? Honestly, Admiral, they're revolutionary. If we could combine their biotechnology with our medical knowledge base, we could virtually eliminate battlefield mortality, human or Zephyrian. The implications hit both leaders simultaneously. 3 years of war had cost both sides hundreds of thousands of lives and vast resources, and here in a bombed-out research facility, their medical personnel had discovered that cooperation could save virtually everyone. Dr. Chen, Admiral Harrison said slowly, what you've demonstrated here, it changes everything. Battle Commander Thexai's forearms moved in a complex gesture of agreement. The Bridgewalker has shown us what is possible when fear is replaced by understanding. Perhaps it is time for both our peoples to consider a different path. Marcus looked between the two military leaders, hardly daring to hope. What are you saying? I'm saying, Admiral Harrison replied, that I think it's time for both sides to remember that this war started over mining rights, not species survival. And maybe it's time to find out if our diplomats can work together as well as our doctors have. The first formal ceasefire in 3 years of warfare was declared 72 hours later. It began as a limited agreement to allow safe passage for medical personnel and wounded. But it quickly expanded as both sides realized the benefits of cooperation. Marcus's neutral aid station became the template for a series of joint medical facilities throughout the war zone. The exchange of medical knowledge led to exchanges of other technologies and gradually, to the recognition that two species who had been trying to destroy each other were actually remarkably compatible. But Marcus knew that his role was far from over. Peace was fragile, and there would always be those on both sides who preferred the simplicity of war to the complexity of coexistence. As long as there were wounded beings who needed healing, he would be there, standing between the forces that sought to divide two species that had more in common than anyone had ever imagined. 5 years after the first ceasefire, Dr. Marcus Chen stood in the central plaza of New Geneva Station, the first jointly constructed human Zephyrian settlement. The ceremony taking place around him would have been unimaginable during the war. The formal establishment of the Interspecies Medical Alliance, with Marcus as its first director. The plaza was filled with beings from both species, their children playing together in ways that spoke to a future neither side had dared to envision during the darkest days of the conflict. Human and Zephyrian engineers had worked together to design the station, creating architecture that accommodated the needs of both species while celebrating their differences. Dr. Chen, Admiral Harrison said as he approached, now wearing the insignia of the Joint Defense Force, are you ready for this? Marcus adjusted his formal dress uniform, still feeling strange in anything other than medical whites. As ready as anyone can be for making history, I suppose. The transformation of the past 5 years had been remarkable. The ceasefire had held, evolving into a formal peace treaty and eventually into something unprecedented in galactic history, a true alliance between two species that had been enemies. The process hadn't been smooth. There had been setbacks, extremist attacks, and moments when war seemed inevitable again. But each time, the network of joint medical facilities had served as a reminder of what cooperation could accomplish. Battle Commander Thexai, now bearing the title of Alliance War Leader, joined them on the reviewing platform. His translator had been upgraded with emotional subroutines that made conversation feel more natural. Though Marcus had learned enough Zephyrian to communicate in simple concepts without technological assistance. Bridgewalker, Thexai said, using the title that had become Marcus's unofficial name among the Zephyrians. "The Council of Nests has asked me to express their gratitude for your vision." "It was never my vision," Marcus replied. "I just treated patients. Everything else grew from that." That was typical of Marcus. Even after being awarded the highest honors both species could bestow, he continued to insist he had simply been doing his job. But everyone else understood that his job had been to serve as a living reminder that life was precious, regardless of its form. The ceremony began with representatives from both governments speaking about the alliance and its achievements. Trade agreements had brought prosperity to both civilizations. Joint research projects had led to breakthroughs in technology, medicine, and space exploration. The combined fleet that had been assembled to defend against external threats was the most powerful military force in known space. But for Marcus, the real achievement was visible in the crowds around him. Human children who spoke Zephyrian as fluently as English. Zephyrian youth who had human friends and understood human customs. Families that had formed across species lines through adoption and partnership agreements that would have been impossible to imagine during the war. Dr. Sarah Kim, now his deputy director, approached with a datapad showing the latest statistics. "Marcus, I thought you'd want to see the numbers before your speech. The Joint Medical Program has achieved a 97% survival rate for battlefield injuries across all current conflicts. We've saved over 2 million lives in the past 5 years. Marcus nodded, but his attention was drawn to a small group near the edge of the plaza. A human woman was helping a young Zephyrian learn to use a mobility device, while a Zephyrian adult observed with obvious parental affection. It was a family that shouldn't exist according to the old ways of thinking, but had become commonplace in the new alliance. "Dr. Chen," a young reporter called out, "what do you think has been the most important achievement of the alliance?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I think it's been learning that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. Human medicine saves Zephyrian lives. Zephyrian technology saves human lives. Together, we can accomplish things neither species could manage alone." "And what challenges do you see for the future?" "The same challenge we've always faced," Marcus replied. "Learning to see each other as individuals rather than representatives of our species. Every patient I treat is someone's family member, someone's friend. When you remember that, it becomes impossible to think of them as enemies." The formal ceremony concluded with the signing of the Medical Alliance Charter, a document that established protocols for interspecies medical cooperation throughout known space. But for Marcus, the real moment of significance came afterward, during the reception. Corporal Rodriguez, now a sergeant and instructor at the Joint Military Academy, approached with his family. His wife was human, but his adopted children were both human and Zephyrian, war orphans who had been taken in by the Alliance's family placement program. "Doc," Rodriguez said, "I wanted you to meet my kids. This is Maria, and this is Velkan." The human girl, maybe 8 years old, smiled shyly. The young Zephyrian, about the same age by his species standards, made a formal greeting gesture that he had clearly been practicing. "Velkan has been asking about you," Rodriguez continued. "He wants to be a medic when he grows up." Marcus knelt down to the young Zephyrian's level. "Is that true?" Velkan's mandibles clicked in excitement. "Yes, Dr. Chen. Papa Rodriguez says you save everyone, no matter what they look like. I want to help people too." "Then I hope you'll come study with us when you're older," Marcus said seriously. "We'll always need good medics." As the evening progressed, Marcus found himself in conversation with warrior physician Kethmore, the Zephyrian doctor who had first offered him the alien medical device years earlier. Kethmore had become one of his closest colleagues and friends in the Alliance. "Marcus," Kethmore said, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had refused that first request to treat our wounded?" Marcus considered the question. "I think eventually someone else would have made the same choice. The war was too costly for both sides to continue indefinitely. But I'm glad it worked out the way it did." "The young ones do not remember the war," Keithmore observed, watching the mixed groups of children playing in the plaza. "To them, cooperation between our species is natural." "That's probably the best outcome we could have hoped for," Marcus agreed. "Maybe their children won't even understand why we ever fought." Late that evening, Marcus stood alone on the observation deck of his quarters, looking out at the stars. The joint fleet was visible in the distance, human and Zephyrian ships flying in perfect formation. It was a sight that would have been inconceivable just a few years earlier. His communicator chimed with an incoming message. It was from the frontier, where the Alliance was making contact with new species. There had been a first contact incident, some kind of misunderstanding that had led to injuries on both sides. They were requesting an experienced interspecies medic to help establish neutral ground for treatment and communication. Marcus smiled as he composed his reply. Some things never changed. Somewhere in the galaxy, there were wounded beings who needed help and barriers between species that needed to be bridged. It was exactly the kind of challenge he had spent his career preparing for. He looked once more at the peaceful scene outside his window, then began packing his medical kit. There was work to do, and Dr. Marcus Chen had never been one to turn away from a patient who needed healing. The legend of the medic who stood between species would continue, carrying the message that in a universe full of differences and conflicts, the commitment to preserve life remained the most powerful force for peace. Marcus had learned that he wasn't just treating patients. He was treating the future itself, one life at a time. As his transport prepared for departure to the frontier, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had started as a simple military medic wanting nothing more than to save lives. In the end, he had helped save 2 entire civilizations from destroying each other. But in his mind, he was still just a medic, doing what medics had always done. Standing between suffering and healing, between despair and hope, between war and peace. The stars ahead held new challenges, new species to meet, and new opportunities to prove that healing could triumph over hatred. Marcus Chen was ready for all of it.